Today we are going to build this built-in router table on the miter station on Combs Design. In part 1 you saw that I built my miter station, but I didn't do my double laminated top yet. Part of the reason is today I'm going to build in this router table and I need to cut out a slot for it first. When I was at Make Nashville in the previous episode, I cut a custom router template. Once I figured out where I wanted my router plate to be, I attached this with some double-sided carpet tape. This is a two-part template for an inside and outside slot that you have to route. Here I'm inserting the inner slot first, which will be a full hole all the way through. Once the full hole is cut, you can then remove the inner part of the template and route a smaller depth that is just to receive the plate. With the hole cut, I removed the top and inserted my dado blade on the table saw. I used the dado blade and made several passes to create a slot for my miter track to sit in. This will help me when I want to make jigs to run stuff through the router table. It took several passes to make the channel wide enough. With that configured, I took my T-track that is used to hold the router fence in place and figured out where I wanted to cut my slots. I couldn't use the table saw and a dado blade for this, so I put a 3/4 inch bit in my router and made several passes until I was at the perfect depth for the T-track. I've been getting my T-track from Taylor Tools and it's much thicker than a lot of the stuff you'll find. Before I moved on, I went ahead and put 3 coats of the Total Boat Halcyon finish on the top, and that's what I used for the rest of this project. Now that I had all the different holes and slots cut, I took the top and reattached it to the miter station. I got my router fitted in the router lift and got ready for installation. This is a JESSM Router Lift 2 and I really love it and it's great for the price. I center punched all the areas that I needed threaded inserts, drilled out the holes, and installed these threaded inserts. I've loved these threaded inserts over the T-nuts that you tap in. These just hold a lot better. I used 1/4-20 hardware all the way around and got things tightened down. Next I began building the box that sits underneath the router lift. This is used for dust collection and has a few requirements. First, it needs electrical, so the router can plug in and get power. It also needs 2 dust collection ports, one of which will be a 2.5 inch hose that runs up to the fence for topside dust collection, and the other will be a 4 inch hose that goes to my main dust collector. The point of this box is to bring the 2.5 inch dust collection into the box where it then connects to the 4 inch dust collection, which collects not only what comes from the top side, but any dust collection that happens from the underside. This box was a simple build with glue and pocket screws. To be able to access the router for maintenance or anything else, I wanted a door on the front, but I didn't want to use hinges, and I opted to use magnets. So first you'll see I marked where I wanted my magnets to go, and center punched and drilled recesses for them. I just used some super glue here to glue in the magnets, and just like the drawer labels that I used in the last episode, you want to be sure you have the correct polarity of the magnets. I then went ahead and got my box in place, and to get my drill in here, I removed the bottom of the box. Before I could reinstall the bottom, I needed to go ahead and drill out a recess to put in my port for my 4 inch hose. This is a remnant of a just terrible Rockler blast gate. I believe they're called stable gates and I would highly recommend you don't buy them. Instead, check out the DIY blast gate design that I have previously built. With that in place, I was able to attach my front and it snapped right in place. I connected one of my shop-made blast gates and moved on to the door. I went ahead and hogged out most of the material with a Forstner bit, and then built this kind of on-the-fly fence, I guess you could call it, and used my template bit to route a hole that will accept my on and off switch for the router. Before I could install that switch, I also had to flush route the electrical box on the backside for all the connections. You'll see exactly what's going on here in just a minute. I drilled some holes for my power input and power output cables. This switch takes your live, your load, and both neutrals. As far as the grounds go, you just splice these together with a wire nut. I like these plastic DIY electrical boxes. You can do a lot of different things with them and keep yourself safe from all electrical connections. With all of that sorted, I went ahead and marked out the lengths I needed on my miter track and T-track. I decided just to cut this by hand in a miter box. There are some rough edges after doing this, so I just took a file and rounded everything over and made it nice and neat so I wouldn't cut myself or it wouldn't catch on anything. The miter track didn't have any holes drilled, so I drilled some holes and I went ahead and countersanked them so it could accept a screw. The main hold here is a 2-part epoxy from TotalBoat, and the screws are really just extra reinforcement. I've found with T-track especially that over time, if it's just screwed in, it begins to pull up with all the pressure you put on it. If I could go back and make my T-track table again, I would have used epoxy on everything. You'll notice my T-track does not go all the way to the back where my French cleat wall is. This is so I can actually get the fence out if I need to. Next, I created this router bit storage solution that goes in the cabinet underneath the router table. This is simply a bunch of holes drilled out, and then I use these Rockler inserts that accept either 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch shank bits. I also installed some 1/4 20 threads for any accessories that bolt down to the router table plate. With my drawer slides in place, all that was left was attaching this storage solution to the drawer slides themselves. I next began working on my fence. I took a lot of this fence design from Jonathan Katz-Moses, and I'll link his video below. This is an old fence I already had on hand from a temporary jig I made. It's just 3 pieces of Baltic birch plywood laminated together. I installed more threaded inserts so I could attach this sacrificial fence to the top. This slides in and out with these 1/4 20 bolts and allows for better dust collection and more support when I'm using the fence to make passes. I used my dado blade to cut a slot to add T-track to the top, where I used a Jonathan Katz-Moses stop block. These are the absolute best stop blocks on the market, and huge shout out to Jonathan Katz-Moses for making such a great product. All that was left was attaching this plate that goes at a right angle on the backside that will accept the hardware to hold the fence down to the T-track. This was only held in place with glue. To be sure the sub-fence, the real fence, and that back right angle piece were flush, I snuck up to flush everything up on the table saw. With this, everything was perfectly square and I'm super happy with the fence. I needed really wide slots so I can maneuver the fence and pull it forward and backwards and at angles to the router bit. I first drilled 2 holes on the outside of my slot and then set up another temporary fence to run my router bit and complete the hole. This technique works really well, and with a little rasp work it looks like a perfectly CNC'd hole. I used my dado blade to hog out a bunch of material, and this is my dust collection port on the top side. I'll install a fitting that allows a 2.5 inch hose to go down to my dust collection box that I made earlier. I used liquid nails like I did for my 4-inch port to connect this to the back side of the fence. Screws hold it in place mainly until the glue dries, but that creates a really good seal. I got my hose hooked up and the router table was pretty much done at this point. One trick that I've learned for any bolts that go in T-Track is to just sand off the markings that are on the top side of the bolt. This helps them slide a lot easier in the T-Track. I went ahead and finished my double laminated top that I didn't finish in the first episode. This was screwed in place just like the router table side, and I also put in a T-Track on this side for the miter saw to have a stop block. Speaking of the miter saw, I went ahead and drilled dust collection for this. There's a shop vac that lives directly under the miter saw, and it is connected to a switch that turns the shop vac on automatically whenever the miter saw is activated. I installed this in the first episode. I used more threaded inserts once again to bolt down the miter saw once I had it leveled and in place. I am really happy with how this project turned out. Bit changes are faster than they've ever been, and the dust collection is truly remarkable. I did several passes with this round over bit. I'm showing you the first and the last pass here, and you can see how little dust is really left behind. That's pretty good in my book. The miter saw is now fitted in place, and you can hear the dust collector kick on and stay on even after the miter saw is off. I got this low profile stop block from Taylor Tools, and it's great as well. If you're not already, hit subscribe. In next week's episode, we're going to build some custom work lights on Combs Design.